endometriosis, IVF, and general life updates. Let's jump into it. Hello, and welcome back to The Other Way. I'm your host, Kasia. And on this podcast, we explore paths less taken in work, life, spirituality, and wellness through hearing the stories of inspiring women. Today, we are going to be doing a solo episode. The last time I did a solo episode was in January, February 2025, so earlier this year, and a lot has happened since then. The last episode that I covered, I talked about my first silent meditation retreat, and today I'm going to fill you in on my infertility journey and my recent stage 4 endometriosis diagnosis. So, fair warning, if any of these topics are triggering to you, we're going to be diving into it. This may not be the episode for you. However, I will say that if you are somebody who is struggling with endometriosis, infertility, or health anxiety in general, this episode could be supportive. I know that in my experience, nothing has been more helpful on this journey than hearing from other women who have gone through the process in some way, shape, or form. My recent podcast episode with Sahana, which dives into her IVF journey and her struggle with infertility, was so unbelievably comforting for me on my own journey. And I would love to say that I feel like I've gotten closer to her since my own endometriosis diagnosis because of the conversation that we had and hearing her story. And that's why I'm coming on here to share this today. I hope that some of what I share can be supportive to a woman out there who is going through something similar. So, without further ado, let's jump on into it. All right. So, as I shared, the last time we talked was in late winter, early spring. I just come fresh off of my silent meditation retreat, which was amazing. Excuse me. And if you've been listening to this podcast for some time, you might already know that I've been struggling with my fertility for about a year. Last March, my husband and I had gotten pregnant. We had a miscarriage in, I think, April, like late April. I got pregnant in February and I had a miscarriage in April. And since then, my fertility journey has really been rocky. My mom was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. That put a lot of stress onto me and my family. And for a while, I kind of blamed the negative pregnancy tests on just the state of my body and how stressed I was. And I think that, that is really valid. It can be almost frustrating to hear for anybody who is struggling with infertility that, just like be less stressed. It feels almost impossible. First of all, if you are somebody like me who struggles with anxiety, there's nothing worse than hearing that because there's nothing that in many cases you can do. Like, it's a physiological situation. I wish I could feel differently. And some days I have better days, but I basically do all the things, the meditation, the therapy, the sleep, exercise, etc. And sometimes I get stressed, and I will share that this year and a half has been stressful, and the fertility journey as a whole has been stressful. And sometime in January of this year, I started to realize that perhaps the negative pregnancy tests could be a sign of something more serious. I was told to meet with a fertility specialist after about 6 months of trying, which I did. And I don't think I shared this on the podcast, but the conversation was really difficult. She recommended from the get-go that I do IVF. It felt like a sales call. And so I really just set that aside. IVF, I had never really considered that as part of my journey. It's not that I have anything against IVF, but it freaks me out personally. It feels like very invasive and violating, and it's not the way that I had wanted my fertility journey to go. And there's also something for me, somebody who tries to do things pretty natural in general. I feel this aversion to putting something into my body when I feel like it's not good for me. I mean, I generally feel this way about drugs and alcohol too. And so perhaps that's part of my health anxiety, but that definitely just influenced my immediate reaction to IVF. I also felt a bit frustrated on that call because I felt like the fertility specialist I'd spoken with was just really pushing IVF without being interested in the root cause of where I might have issues. And so I decided to put that conversation on the back burner, and I ended up finding a really incredible functional doctor, functional MD, actually based out of California, who does work with fertility cases only. She is somebody that takes a really holistic approach to infertility, looks at the root cause, and as an MD is able to prescribe medication and also make lifestyle recommendations, but she's very thorough in getting to the root cause of things. And her name is Dr. Yao, by the way. And I hope that she's going to come on the podcast in a couple of weeks so you can actually hear from her. But her approach, thinking about egg quality, fertility preservation, and really optimizing health for the longevity, for your own longevity and the longevity of your children, it just really resonated with me. My husband and I decided to work with her, and this was back in March. And that is really what kicked off what I feel like, what I feel was a bit more of like a fertility intervention. It wasn't anything like IUI or IVF, but I went through a detox period of time. I did a bunch of different tests. We discovered that my folate is really low, meaning I most likely have the MTHFR mutation, very important information. I also discovered that my inflammation was quite high. And unfortunately, since then, has even gotten higher, which I'm going to get into in a bit. But working with Dr. Yao is, and again, I discovered many different things about my health, and it was really eye-opening and insightful. And working with Dr. Yao is really what inspired me to pursue and investigate my endometriosis. If I had endometriosis, and to really get a diagnosis and pursue treatment, she was pretty adamant that getting a diagnosis for endometriosis was going to be really important. My estrogen was a bit high on my tests, which would be a signal of endometriosis. And then, of course, some of my inflammation markers were up. And so, through working with her, I ended up, over the course of many months, getting a bunch of appointments in place. I ended up seeing a total of 3 surgeons, actually. The first surgeon for endometriosis. So, endometriosis, just to backtrack, is a inflammatory autoimmune condition where endometrial-like tissue grows outside of your uterus. This causes benign growths that create a lot of inflammation. Endometrial tissue bleeds and releases hormones, estrogen primarily, just like the uterine lining and or just like the endometrium, and it leads to hormonal imbalances, inflammation, and then symptoms like painful periods and infertility. It is actually one of the leading causes of unexplained infertility, and it is extremely difficult to diagnose because the primary method of diagnosis is through surgery. It is very difficult to see endometriosis on ultrasounds. I was shown to have a cyst in earlier tests that I did, but then that cyst went away, and so we really didn't think that it was endometriosis, but my painful periods and my higher estrogen, which again is linked to the endo releasing estrogen into your system as well, is what really pushed or encouraged Dr. Yao to encourage me to look into this. And I ended up meeting with 3 different surgeons. All of them were pretty well known. I mean, unfortunately, this whole experience has been such so difficult because I felt as though I really had to advocate for myself. Luckily, I found Dr. Yao, and that took hours of searching to find a functional fertility doctor. It is very rare. Here in California, at least where I live, if someone is struggling with infertility, the immediate next step from your OBGYN is to go to a fertility doctor, reproductive endocrinologist, and typically their protocol is everything from IUI, drugs, and IVF, and all of those methods are successful, but to me, I don't feel they addressed the root of my infertility or my fertility issues because I had gotten pregnant before. And I had a miscarriage. So I knew that it was possible for me. And yet there was something environmentally that was getting in the way, which is why I absolutely was so grateful to Dr. Yao's approach and her philosophy, which encouraged me to look for an endometriosis doctor. So that brings me to the three surgeons I met with. For endometriosis specifically, the type of doctor I had to meet with was a surgeon by default. That's because the treatment, which is excision or ablation of the endometrial tissue, and diagnosis is done via laparoscopy. That is, they go in through your belly button and through two small incisions using a robot and actually find and remove the tissue or ablate the tissue. And excision, by the way, like by and large, is the recommended way to go because it removes the tissue so it doesn't grow back in a lot of cases. Even though endo can come back, it delays that grow back period, if that makes sense. So the first surgeon that I went to was eager to get me into surgery like next week. I you know, bless her soul, she seemed very well educated and talented, but I felt as though she wasn't very curious about my circumstances, didn't ask me many questions. And I'm glad I went with my gut because the second surgeon that I went to, she was the one who recommended we do an MRI at UCSF before pursuing surgery as an option. And that MRI then helped lead me to a diagnosis. So, when we talk about diagnosing endo, as I mentioned, the primary way of doing it is with a laparoscopic surgery. But if your endo is quite severe, you can see it on an MRI. And UCSF apparently has a very advanced MRI approach, which is able to see endo in a lot more cases than you would otherwise. And so, this surgeon is the one that sent me to get an MRI, which I got done on the 23rd of May. And during that time, Dr. Yao also referred me to another surgeon who was the one who actually saw my MRI results first and did an ultrasound on me as well and diagnosed me with stage 3, stage 4 endometriosis, which was a gut punch, to be honest. Like in the ultrasound, she's doing a pelvic ultrasound, so inside of me, checking to see if my uterus is floating, if my ovaries are floating, like trying to nudge them and stuff. And, between that imaging and also the MRI, we were able to see that my uterus is completely attached to the left side of my pelvis and it's off center. My left ovary is covered in endo and in the front of my uterus. And the MRI also showed that I have endometriosis on my liver slash diaphragm. So she says potentially the diaphragm. The MRI radiologist said liver. And so, in addition to meeting with an endosurgeon, I need to also have a consult with a general surgeon to be in the room when they remove the endo. And so, yeah, this has been intense. I say this all so casually now because it's been a month just about since I've gotten this news. But I cannot emphasize enough that if you are listening to this and you are somebody who is about to get a diagnosis or just got a diagnosis and you feel completely crushed by it, that is such a normal reaction, I feel at least. I really went into a funk. I was so heartbroken over this news Not because I didn't have a hunch that I had endometriosis, but that it was so much more severe than I had expected. I feel a lot of frustration and gratitude at the same time. Frustration that had I not gone out of network and worked with Dr. Yao and pursued things the way that I had, we wouldn't have even found this endometriosis most likely, or it would have taken much longer to find it. I feel frustration for the majority of women, like something like 1 in 10 women are diagnosed with endo, and something like at least 50% of infertility cases, unexplained infertility cases, are linked to endo, but so many women are not diagnosed. It is difficult to diagnose. Even when I was trying to find an endo surgeon, I called probably 15 different doctors here in the Bay Area, OBGYN surgeons with their front desk not even knowing what endo was. And so I just feel so much frustration that this is a disease that is just not that largely talked about. And yet, the more I share my story, the more I hear of women who have similar symptoms or perhaps had excision surgery. And so, this is part of the reason why I wanted to share a solo episode about this, not just to give everyone an update as to what's been going on in my life, but to also just talk about this because there are so many silent cases of endo with no symptoms. There are symptoms that are weird, like extreme fatigue around your cycle. There are symptoms that are bladder related, bowel movement related. They can be related to endo. Like a lot of IBS cases could be related to endo. And like even on my own MRI, the surgeon pointed out that it looked like some endo was encroaching on my bladder and asked if I had symptoms. And so I just feel like so much more education needs to be shared with providers and with women to just be aware that this could be something that is impacting your health, well-being, fertility. And if I had had this diagnosis earlier, I probably would have made some different choices with excision surgery earlier and or other fertility treatments. So yeah, I share this matter of factly, but I cannot emphasize enough, like, how much heartbreak I felt, how much fear I felt, overwhelmed, the feeling of feeling like my body was broken, which I've since found compassion for that part instead of the frustration and anger. But I think that those are pretty normal reactions to an unfortunate diagnosis, and I am grateful that I was not only just diagnosed, but I have treatment options and that I have access to them and that, I'm in an area with some of the best surgeons for this condition in the world. Um, if you haven't listened to Sahana's episode, I highly recommend you do because we dive into towards the end of the episode. She had 7 rounds of IVF, 9 transfers, an ectopic pregnancy, miscarriage, etc and only now got an endo diagnosis, like, years later. And so I cannot emphasize enough how important it is for each of us listening to be advocates for our own health. I saw this even with my mom when she was diagnosed with cancer. The original doctor that she was matched with probably would have mistreated her. They could not figure out what type of cancer it was. They were going to give her a general chemotherapy, and my mom has been in treatment for a year with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and through our push and our advocacy and our reaching out to specific physicians, we were able to place her with somebody who put her on a completely different trajectory and treatment plan from the get-go. And I do think that that is, why she's been responding well to treatment so far. Like, she hasn't even touched that extreme chemo. Like, that is like stages away from an option versus that would have been the only option for her when she was first diagnosed. Anyway, I digress. Advocacy for your health is so important. So, along with this diagnosis, I also learned, that I would need to have the surgery, obviously, but that prior to the surgery, it is recommended that I do a round of egg retrievals to create embryos, if not 2 retrievals. And that is to preserve eggs that might be affected or damaged during the surgery and also because IVF as a whole flares endometriosis. And so doing it before surgery is recommended if I want to get pregnant because flaring endometriosis, excuse me, is a contributor to implantation issues, conception issues, etc. So, yeah, all of this hit me like a ton of bricks. And I just met with the recommended fertility doctor who modifies the egg freezing. Well, it technically would be embryo freezing round, but for the retrieval process, she modifies the drugs so that the estrogen won't spike quite as high because that is primarily what drives the endometriosis. And yeah, I met with her yesterday. I loved her, but it's been really tough. I seem really calm probably sharing this right now. There was like a lot of grief in the discussion and fear. I think I have a lot of health anxiety and I really have a lot of fear around, injecting something that feels like it's doing my body harm, even if it is hopefully providing a positive outcome for other things that I value. But it's a really difficult decision. It's a difficult decision to do this. On one hand, I have a lot of fear around putting my body through the egg retrieval process and then having re- retrieving the eggs, doing 1 or 2 rounds of that, then having a surgery and then trying to get pregnant. Like all of it sounds like such an intense whirlwind and just so at odds with other things that I value, like tuning into my body and feeling connected to my body. Like there's something about this experience that feels as a whole, like all of it, the retrieval, the surgery that feels so like violent. With the surgery, at least I feel like it's helping my body. With the retrievals, I know that it's harming my body potentially. I mean, it definitely is going to flare the endo, right? And so I just have a lot of anxiety around that. And so it's been really difficult. It's been really, really difficult. So that is a general life update. I'm recording this on Friday, June 20th, and I just met with the doctor yesterday. And yeah, that is what is going on. So from my end, what are some of the things that have been really supportive for me during this journey? I have been leaning so much on meditation, therapy, especially like somatic mindfulness-based therapy and EMDR to help retrain some of the parts, so to speak, that are flaring up with anxiety. And also my faith. The past couple of months, I've found myself really praying towards a higher power, really exploring building a relationship with God. Like, I've never been a religious person. The closest to religion that I've ever gotten has been, Zen Buddhism, which is more of a philosophy, I would even say, than religion. But there's just this whole experience has and not just the fertility and my mom, it's just, like, brought me to my knees. As somebody who's a type A control freak, like I feel like there's only so much that my brain can handle. And it's just such a powerful reminder of the fact that all of this is uncertain and transient and we have no control. Like there are things and decisions and actions we can take, but at the end of the day, nobody knows an outcome. There's nothing that is truly within our control. All of that is an illusion. And I think that being able to surrender that to a higher power has been really supportive for me. And to be frank, this kind of starts to skew away from the endometriosis discussion, but I've been off of social media. Yes, posting clips for the podcast, but Aldana, who's my right hand, has been doing that. I've been off of social media since the beginning of May, like entirely. Deleted the apps, don't log in. I did that right before we left for Japan and haven't been back, and it's been incredible. And it just made me so aware. It's just made me and I've just been reflecting a lot about how intertwined my perception of spirituality has been as like one and the same with content, if that makes sense. Like so much of what I consumed online in the form of podcasts, in the form of social media posts were like spiritually driven. And when I cut all of those things out, it created such a void for me. And it really helped me recognize and understand how much power there can be in connecting with something higher than myself, greater than myself in silence. And I think that throughout this like health process, I really had to strip back the things that I've been consuming because it's just a lot of information coming in at once. And I found a lot of ease with that silence, you know? Nature loves a vacuum, so other things get sucked in, but I've become more aware of how this noise generally impacts me, and I've become a lot more careful about the content that I consume, may it be a YouTube clip or podcasts. And just really aware of not merging my spiritual belief system with like some sort of materialism, spiritual materialism. I feel like that's a trap that is very easy to fall into. And B, just becoming very aware of not overwhelming my system with, I don't know, content that doesn't make me feel good, content that honestly tears me away from faith and hope and the divine. Just to give you like a concrete example, I gave up social media, have still been listening to podcasts, and Peter T, I absolutely adore him. He had put out an episode on infertility for men and then another episode for women, and I just remember starting to listen to the episode as I was driving up to, Spirit Weavers last weekend, and I just notice my body start to tense up and I get a bit more anxious as I'm listening to this content, and I just had to turn it off. And I texted my husband later and because we both love him, and I was like, "Listen, like you're just going to have to consume this content for me, like when you listen to it and then tell me on a need to know basis what I need to know." And honestly, I have to say, even though in general my anxiety feels much more intense right now with everything happening, I feel really empowered in being able to make those choices. And in the same way that I can choose the input that I'm taking in and whether that stimulates me or creates like a negative environment within myself, I know that I can also make similar choices with how I choose to relate to the IVF if I go through with it or not and the surgery, right? And so just recognizing the parallel there of the agency, what comes in shapes my mind, and that those thoughts shape my emotional state and my reality. And I have some agency within that to steer that in different ways has been really helpful. And I've just really been doing my best to practice surrendering it to God and surrendering the need to control and making decisions that feel sound and are coming from a place of trust and faith and not fear. All of this is easier than said than done. On a final update note, Spirit Weavers was amazing this year. If you don't know what that is, it is a all women's gathering in Oregon. It is a back to the land gathering. You learn ancestral skills, and it was such an incredible reprieve from all of medical noise. I totally turned off my phone. I spent all this time in nature, and I just feel the call to just the need to do more of that. Like, I felt so connected to my intuition, and I felt so connected to spirit in that environment, and I just feel like it's such a clear sign that when I'm starting to spiral away from that, I need to go back to, that my environment can influence what the experience that I'm having as well. So in the same way that like what we take in can be news or social media, I think it's also the places that we find ourselves and the places that we spend time. And on that note, that is a life update, hopefully with also a couple of tips of things that have helped me along the way. If you are listening to this and you are relating to it in any way, maybe infertility or endometriosis. By the way, I will hyperlink an episode that I did with Kate Edmonds. I believe that's her last name from Heal Endo. It's exceptional. I'm going to try to get her on the podcast again because I want to do an episode all on fertility and I feel like she'd be great. It was like one of my most viral episodes. But if you're relating to any of this, please reach out. I would love to hear from you and I'm feeling really inspired to create a support group around this. I could really use that, like a very positive, uplifting, hopeful group. And so if this resonates with you, give me a shout. You can email me at kasia@inflowplanner.com or actually for the podcast, kasia@theotherwaypodcast.com. And also still DM us on Instagram, Aldana. My right hand is still checking it. So let us know if this episode resonates with you, this content. And for the next season of The Other Way, and we have about 1 or 2 more episodes left before we end this season. But for the next season, I'm really feeling called to share stories like Sahana's and have that story format, but focus it on fertility and infertility and endometriosis success. So let me know if that would resonate with you. I just feel like the internet is such a dark place with so many negative horror stories about fertility and stuff. And we just need an alternative. And I just feel like selfishly, I would love to fill my mind with that as opposed to some of the other stuff, especially going through what I'm about to be going through. So thank you so much for listening. And thank you so much for being a loyal listener. And I will talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into The Other Way. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review. It really helps the podcast grow, and I'm ever so grateful. If you want to stay connected, you can find information on how in our show notes. All right, that's all for today. See you next time.